The 2017 Major League Baseball season is underway. Spring training far behind, but lying in its wake, dozens of injured pitchers. One of those pitchers, Jordan Schafer, a prime example of why coaches need to be careful about converting position players to the mound, and why some players simply can't make the transition, regardless of velocity or strike throwing potential. I'm Joe Janish, and I'll discuss this in depth with pitching troubleshooter Angel Borrelli. We're also going to let you know what science says about the curveball, including how to throw it and how to teach it. All this and more, Season 4, Episode 1 of The Fix. Season 4, Episode 1 of The Fix. Here we go! Featuring pitching motion troubleshooter Angel Borrelli.
Hi, Joe. I'm so glad you have so much energy today.
Hey, I've been storing it up all winter long. It's like the bear. You just woke up.
I feel exactly the same way. I'm so glad to be here, and hello to everybody, and thanks for all your off-season emails. And wow, it's great to be back, isn't it?
Oh, it's fantastic. And I feel like we've never been gone because I feel like all winter we've been getting messages and tweets and texts from the coaches and some players. It's been a more active winter than I think we had ever before.
Yes, it's been the most active one, and I love all the inquiries I got from the coaches. And there actually were some coaches that were calling me for step-by-step, instructions and ideas for getting their guys through fall ball and then preseason, and then giving me their feedback. And it's been fantastic. I love that people are taking all this information seriously. So kudos to everyone out there.
Yeah, and for those of you who are listening in the future, we're at the tail end of March when we're doing this recording. By the time you hear this, it's probably going to be around or after opening day in the major leagues. So what I wanted to start off with you, Angel, is just to talk a little bit about what's been happening in spring training at the major league level. Last year, 2016. It seemed that the injuries were kind of trending down a little bit at the major league level. I don't want to talk about what was happening in the minor leagues and amateurs because it's all over the place. But MLB is the one place where we can kind of keep track of what's happening and kind of get a feel for what the trends are. I felt like there weren't as many injuries, especially at the beginning of last year. There weren't quite as many Tommy John surgeries. I know some pitchers were trying to do other things, alternative surgeries and PRPs and all that sort of thing. But this year, that is absolutely not the case. I've been keeping my own little unofficial log of all of the injuries that have been happening with pitchers this year in major league camps, and I have counted 42 arm ailments, and I'm calling them ailments because they're not necessarily injuries that are putting people on a disabled list. But anytime a pitcher had to be shut down for at least 3 days, I kind of wrote it down in my notebook. And 42 pitchers went down so far. And that does not include the 35 or 40 or so pitchers who are coming off of Tommy John surgery. I kept those people off the list. So you've got 42 pitchers who had some kind of an ailment, whether it was a forearm strain, whether it was shoulder tightness, whether it was shoulder fatigue. They have all these different terms that they use. It all comes down to the guy can't throw. Anything that took a pitcher off a mound for 3 days, not including the 35 or 40 guys coming off Tommy John surgery because they're a special case. You're talking about almost over 80 pitchers that are having some kind of arm problem one way or another. And of those 42 pitchers who had some kind of an arm issue this spring, 11 of them, already 11 either need Tommy John surgery, have already had Tommy John surgery, or are seeking an alternative option to Tommy John surgery. One of the Tommy John surgeries happened before spring training even started, a week before. And, the injuries started the first day of spring training. We found out that Alex Reyes of the St. Louis Cardinals had a torn UCL, and he was going to have Tommy John surgery. That's already happened. I know we go through this every year. The pitchers get back on the mound and they start getting injured. I think it's good to go over it just because it kind of helps everyone to understand why all these injuries happen when they happen. So maybe you could shed some light on why this happens every year the same time and what can be done to kind of prevent this for those pitchers who are at the amateur levels, maybe just starting out in the Northeast. I know some pitchers are starting to throw this week and next week, and maybe have been in for a couple of weeks. But maybe you can shed some light on how we can avoid this just mass deluge of injuries every spring.
Right. And yes, we do talk about it every season, but guess what? I have something new to add, something that it's thoughts I've been pondering. But first, I want to say, I love that when you were making the list, you included guys that were off for 3 days. And a lot of listeners might have been saying, well, gee, that's no big deal. I mean, 3 days, cool. But when most injuries start, they start with something small because the body's telling you, I didn't like the way you did that. And if perhaps the pitcher, especially in preseason, is throwing limited numbers of throws, maybe he's still flat ground, he's maybe just throwing a 25 pitch bullpen, he gets sore. You have to understand that soreness, if he were in a bigger predicament, like on a mound, could actually have been something more serious. So 3 days at the beginning of a season is the body talking to the pitcher. And those 3 day guys are the most important ones to pay attention to because that's the body whispering something's wrong. And it is if you start to wrap your brain around that something's wrong with the body because something's wrong with, and let's make a list of things we can control: the pitcher's mechanics, what I had him doing, uh, the timing in which he did it, something about the day he did it, he didn't warm up, whatever. If we start to know that there are things we can control, and we start with that list, then you're better off and you're closer to coming to a way to get rid of that problem or to have a solution, because there are many things that are in control and there are many things that are not, but you have to run the gamut. You've got to play small ball when it comes to injuries and soreness is the sign of something worse to come, and you want to definitely pay attention because these are pitchers who have normal soreness after pitching. If they're on the bench, that's because they have something that's more than normal, even though you might be classifying it. Don't in your head pretend to minimize it or think you should minimize it. I want you to look at those sorenesses as the most important, because guess what? They're the ones that are they're rearing their ugly heads soon enough to where you possibly and probably can create a solution for it. So what I think happens at the beginning of the season, it's obvious that the pitcher, especially if it's the first week, when they first pick up a ball, their off season wasn't handled correctly. And so to all the listeners that are listening now, make sure that you tune back in prior to the off season, where I will run you through things you should do in the off season. And also for the high school coaches, make sure you come back to me right as your high school season or college season is ending, because the department that I think contributes the most to preseason injuries is the unfinished business department. The department where the high school or college pitcher has gone through his season, no problems. He's getting ready to probably go play for the college guys summer ball wherever the coach tells him to go. Or the high school guy's going to play travel ball. And we know, who are in the baseball industry, summer ball's the biggest deal. Everybody loves it. College guys are going to Cape Cod. High school guys are playing travel ball in some of the best teams. So they're actually going from spring. Actually, they're going from preseason to in-season to summer. Now, for you coaches, you only have your arms around them up until the end of the high school season. Obviously, you get feedback, especially for college coaches that are sending their pitchers to specific leagues. But really and truly, you have your eyes on them up through May or June. What's so important for you to know is, in fact, right now, I am asking all my guys, what are you doing this summer? Because with the pitchers that I have under my wing, and I mean that I'm controlling pitch counts, or controlling their throwing schedules based on their pitch counts, their training, their just the whole bit. I engineer them all year long. I have a big group that's under my wing in that way. I need to know now, and this is the end of March, what they're doing in the summer. The reason is I know they're not going to have a big break. So what I'm doing now is watching carefully over anything that starts to happen at the end of the season. Because if it's happening at the end and it's something that is a signal of something, it will not just eradicate itself during the summer. And if they have it in the summer and then they're expected to play fall ball, and they only have a short time, which might only be a few weeks, don't think that thing isn't going to rear its ugly head. And even if they have a few weeks off and it calms down, if it's there, it's there. Very few things that are really wrong just disappear. So what you want to do is you want to make sure the first step is making sure that if there's unfinished business, that you check it out when they come back to you. So if you're looking at a guy who at the end of the season is having trouble, then you know he's going to be having trouble in summer ball, and then you can have a list and a menu to go to make sure that they handle the fall better, that they control their off season, and then when the spring starts, that's when they're going to shine. If all this is ignored, then, for example, Joe, the pitcher you mentioned that had the injury prior to the season, something was going on last season, unless he had an acute injury. So these things are only surprises if you're not paying attention and looking ahead. And I don't want to get into all the details right now about what I want you to do at the end of the season. I want you to check back with us. And Joe, let's make a note and make sure that and I'll find out what the end, I think it's June for high school and probably the same for college. I want to definitely address for the coaches a checklist of things they want to know and have in their possession so that they're putting sort of little tags onto certain things. So when their guys come back, they can take a look in September or August and then put together a plan that combines rest with training and conditioning and then re-entry into the winter ball or winter program and then how they're going to get to spring. And that's really how I keep my guys safe, by having the big plan but always paying attention to the end of the season. But I can tell everyone right now, make sure you're monitoring your pitchers carefully for big changes that you see, fatigue coming on sooner than they should. Definitely have their strength coaches weigh them in, the size of their body. As it changes through the season, if they lose weight, they're at more risk for injury. So right now, the beginning that you're seeing can't unravel itself unless you start to figure out what didn't he do. You can't always play catch up in season, but you might be able to take a guy on the DL like these 3-day guys and try to go back, figure out what happened, actually ask yourself, was this happening at the end of last season? And then make a decision to try to get on top of it. But I think that's what's happening, Joe. There's not a big enough picture, and there's not enough control that coaches are taking in the off season. And I think that if a coach wants to have control over his players, there should be some sort of directives that they use during the fall and winter. I know there's tight rules. You can't actually be with them, but you certainly can send out, just like, colleges send out workouts. They can send out directives to their guys, but at the end of the season, they should have some idea of what's going on. And I think in the major leagues, that sometimes they're just sweating it, hoping these guys don't get too more injured, and then they let them go. And then the next thing they come back, and they're not controlling their off season. And I know this because I worked with a lot of pro pitchers. I work with a lot of minor leaguers. And really and truly, they're not saying this is when we want you to start throwing. And by the way, you need to get on top of that weak arm you have. And by the way, you need to strengthen your forearms. So those are some suggestions that I think a way that we need to look at things. And I think that's what actually happens. It's a culmination of things that didn't just start the day they walked onto the field for spring training.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When I excuse me, when I look over the list of some of these pitchers, and I think back to what happened last year, and I know that a lot of these pitchers had some kind of an ailment or issue or whatever it was last year. Whether it was a forearm strain, whether it was a lingering elbow issue or whatnot, and it's as you said. I think that these pitchers and the people who are handling them, they think that if they just take off 3 months and don't throw a ball, don't do anything, they just hang out and watch the sun go up and down, that things are just going to heal themselves, that mechanical flaws are just going to work themselves out. Like it doesn't work that way. You have to be proactive in trying to fix the issue, whatever the issue is. And I think it comes back to something that we talk about all the time is going to the root cause of a problem, and that's something that definitely does not happen at the major league level. Guys have a problem, they just let them rest and they put them back on the mound. So it's really not a big surprise. I mean, the first guy that had an ailment on the first day of spring training, Alex Reyes, I couldn't understand why so many people were surprised that it turned out that he had blown out his UCL when all of last year he was having elbow issues. The UCL doesn't magically heal itself in 3 months or 4 months of off season. It's something that has to be addressed, and it never was. And he went out and pitched first day of spring training, had problems, gone. Now he's had his surgery. He'll be out all year.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of big names on this list. Like, Alex Reyes is a big time pitcher. David Price, we're still not sure what's going on with him. Anthony DeSclafani, Trevor May, Sonny Gray, Houston Street, Colin McHugh, Steven Matz, Jared Weaver, Andrew Kashner, Homer Bailey, who seems to be the poster child for arm injuries every year. He's always on this list. But there was one pitcher that I was a little interested and surprised to see. He's a pitcher named Jordan Schafer. And usually when we have, we see a pitching injury, we can say, oh, well, that guy threw, 200 innings last year in the last 5 years, so maybe it's overuse. Maybe he was going in and out of the bullpen too often. Maybe it goes back to him being a pitcher, a year-round pitcher as a youth. In the case of Jordan Schafer, we really don't have that kind of a background. We have a pitcher who really wasn't a pitcher until maybe a year ago. He's been a professional player since he was 18 years old. He was drafted out of high school, and he's been an outfielder. He's been an outfielder throughout his entire minor league career. In his 5 or 6 year major league career, he's been an outfielder. And I guess his bat was never quite enough to make him a regular everyday player. So as a left-hander who could throw about 93, 94 miles an hour, he said, hey, let me try pitching. So here's a guy who doesn't really have, I know he threw a little, I think he threw a little bit in high school, was a pitcher, but that was well over 12 years ago. This is kind of I don't want to say a new arm, but it's a pretty fresh arm. And yet he pitched a little bit last year, and he went to spring training camp with the Cardinals this year. And I think it was the second or third week of spring training, he was starting to have issues with his elbow. And now it turns out he does have a UCL problem, and he's looking at alternatives to Tommy John surgery, but it kind of looks like that might be the end result. So, Angel, maybe you could comment a little on how a guy who really wasn't a pitcher, didn't have the mileage on his arm. You can't really blame it on the youth baseball or anything else. Here's a guy who really was not on the mound at all for over 10 years. Goes on the mound and he blows out his UCL. How does that happen?
Well, I love this topic because I'd like to use this to teach the listeners about something that they may not consider. And I know in this day and age of tons of youth injuries, there's a lot of parents that want to protect their kid. And sometimes I hear them say, oh, I'm not going to let him pitch till he's 14, or I only let him pitch once a week. But when you say to me that this guy was an outfielder and then he became a pitcher, and he's 30 years old now, so we're talking about a late 20s switch in positions, the first thing that I think is that he had to have altered his arm mechanics to accommodate the lack of range of motion he would have in his shoulder, because he stopped pitching in his high school years, and let that arm not go through the motions that are required around the shoulder specifically, and so therefore the kind of mechanics he would have had to use or probably used were such that they were altered. And whenever you alter the mechanics, you're going to have a breakdown in the shoulder, the elbow, both. One might come before the other. Now I haven't seen him pitch, and so I can't say this speaks to him, but I love the topic of discussing this. So first of all, the shoulder and the elbow have to move in a very specific way in pitching, and we as professionals want to see kids who are pitchers start pitching at an early age. And what we know from the scientific research is that when doctors go in and look at the inside of the shoulders, when they're doing operations, they're actually seeing an adaptation that occurs around the shoulder of a pitcher that is accommodating the extreme external rotation that the pitcher has. And this is the position the pitcher's in if you're standing behind the catcher. It's when the pitcher has completely rotated to face his target. When you're looking at him, you're seeing both of his pockets if he had jeans on. You're seeing the name across the chest, and you're seeing the arm angle. The forearm is, a lot of you guys call it laying back, backwards towards the outfield, and that is the degree to which that forearm lays back is the external rotation component, and that is a product of what the shoulder's doing. When kids start doing that at an early age, there's actually an adaptation around the bone, and of course the muscles getting that stretch, and we want that. And the stretch that comes with that is what produces the force. Remember, a muscle that contracts, which is what it does when it comes towards the plate, has to be stretched. So the greater the stretch, the greater the force. So if pitchers that lose that range of motion, that are pitchers who've pitched since an early age, who have labrum surgery, let's say, the doctors go in and tighten that up. You ask many coaches and they say, you can always tell a guy who's had labrum surgery because he doesn't get that external rotation. They are limited in their external rotation. So thus, they are like a kid who didn't pitch to an older age, or like Jordan, who at a very older age decided to change positions. There is no position in baseball that requires that type of external rotation. Remember, the pitcher's taking the ball away and he's letting it go when he wants to. When you're making a play on the field, you got to get the ball off as fast as you can. There is no taking the ball backwards before you throw it forwards. Outfielders probably have more than any other position, but not to the degree. And the body's not going to keep that range of motion going unless you're actually practicing it. So to let that go from high school to late 20s, my guess is he's altered his mechanics. When you are altering your mechanics around the shoulder, like post-labrum guys, or let's say you're altering your mechanics around the elbow, like post-Tommy John guys like to do, you're going to have the other joint doing something to accommodate the joint you're protecting. So that's why the elbow guys will end up with shoulder problems. The shoulder guys will end up with elbow problems. And this is why looking at pitchers when they come off of surgeries is so important, because trust me, they're going to move a little differently. It's just like you move differently if your neck hurts. You move a little differently if your hip hurts. You might look kind of normal, but you know you're moving differently. It's just the way the body protects you. So this is what I would say that's happened with him. Now, I haven't seen his mechanics, but it's such a great lesson for parents to hear and coaches to know that if somebody doesn't have the adaptation physically, they might be putting themselves at great risk. So we don't like to see someone who hasn't pitched ever and then he's 15 or 16 and he pitches. Now, if he's got a great range of motion, perfect. And this is something you would want to look for. You would want to look for, okay, I know he can throw strikes, but is he throwing them right? Now, I also know the coaches are in the business of getting strike throwers on their mound. And that is what they should be in the business of. I mean, we wouldn't like baseball if the coaches got too much concerned with other stuff. But there is a branch of baseball, like myself, where we're the ones that are protective. So we want to try to find that middle point where we're taking care of the guys who throw the strikes, and we're making sure that we're not setting someone up for disaster. So my guess is with Jordan that he doesn't have the physical adaptation. I didn't see that he was throwing in the 90s, but if he was, and without that external rotation, that would be very interesting to me to see. So like I said, I'm not saying this is the case with him, but it does bring up the idea that pitching is a very precision skill with very great demands in terms of the pitcher's range of motion around the shoulder. And unless you have that adaptation, whether it's on a bony level, muscular level, both, or you've been doing that and you can do it, you're going to have altered mechanics, in which case you're going to end up with some stress around another joint. And in his case, it's the elbow. So this is too bad for him. But so parents, in protection of your son, don't let him just pitch once a week in a game. No, he should be pitching twice a week, once in between starts. Don't let your kid play another field until you go, well, he's 16 and now I'm going to let him take the risk. No, he needs to develop the skill and be prepared for that skill. So let's be careful that in the name of trying to protect our pitchers, that we hold them back from doing it. No, your better strategy is protect them in the way they do it. Make sure it's how they do it, not that they're doing it. That is the important key here.
Okay. So, I mean, Jordan Schafer was, I think he's got to be 29 or 30 years old. So at that point, it's probably not a good idea to start converting to pitching. It's something you really need to start earlier.
Well, he's somebody I would love to see, because there obviously is something that was going right. There's a reason. Coaches aren't dumb. There's some reason why they thought he'd be great on the mound. It sounds like he may have been great on the mound. But, for example, let's say there's something great about him. And let's say the coach said, yeah, we want to put you on the mound. Well, he should have gone out immediately and checked to be sure that somebody looking at him, I would love to have seen him and said, okay, well, we're just like I have to do with the labrum guy. Okay, we've got to increase this range of motion here because this is going to cause problems. And there is a way to do it, obviously, and a way to train that, but you don't just do it without having any knowledge of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not necessarily unprecedented what he was trying to do. There have been other major leaguers. I think the one that comes to mind for me is there's a guy named Matt Bush who was a shortstop for when he first came up in the minor leagues, and then he had some issues, and when he came back later he became a pitcher, but he was still in his 20s when he converted to pitching, and I think he still had done some pitching even when he was playing shortstop. He was one of those rare athletes who had a really strong arm, and I think the teams that had him early in his career, they were still thinking about, well, maybe we could put him on the mound if we have to. So I think he already had that pitching motion and had that range of motion that he needed, because he's pitching pretty well now, and he throws in the mid 90s. I think he's with the Rangers. But yeah, it's an interesting lesson for everyone to learn from. Is just because a guy can throw hard or can throw strikes doesn't necessarily mean he can be a pitcher over the long term.
That's exactly right.
So that was our teaching moment, and now we're going to move into our third section of our podcast. And this year, I spoke to you about this during the off season. We hear the word science a lot thrown around, sometimes irresponsibly, often by people that may not necessarily have the qualifications to talk about science in the manner that they do. In your case, you have a science background, and I thought maybe this year would be a good year to give everybody kind of a new spin on science, a better spin on science, the real science from someone who really has the background to talk about it. So this year, we're going to do this every episode. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about science on the bump and the science of pitching and the science of getting it done.
I think something really important to start the season with is reminding everyone that I think what I love most about the wonderful work that I'm able to do because of the great pictures that come to me is that, I have the background in science from the books, and I have the background from the degrees I have. But taking this to the field and being on the field every day with pitchers, and my work is all one on one except for when I'm with the group in the gym, I learn from them. And every year I become smarter because the pitchers are better. They come to me with the most interesting questions. Some of them are new. Some of them have been with me for years. And I think that when you can take the blend of science and put it in the trenches, and then you actually see what happens, then you can come up with statements that really make sense. And the proof is always in the pudding. I say that all the time because, especially being a woman in baseball, if I say something works, you can know that I'm saying it works because my pitchers tell me it works. And my pitchers have issues that make me go to the books to connect dots. And I think that that's kind of an important feature. So, really, when you're hearing me speak, you're hearing me apply science to things that pitchers need and want and ask for. And it's when I speak about it, it's because I've gotten the feedback from the pitchers, and they say, Angel, this is great. This really works. This helped my curveball. This helped my changeup, whatever it is. And this season, this last year, I always have a passion every year. And this year, I've been passionate about some of the specific pitches, understanding the muscles that are involved, etc. And I also, because I have communication with so many coaches, and I always invite people to send in questions. This year, just the other day, Steve, a coach here in California, wrote me and he asked about the curveball. And coincidentally, he asked, what age can they start throwing it? I mean, are there any rules about this? Is it safe? And coincidentally, the day before, I was working with a travel team that invited me to come in and teach them my warm up program. And the first hand that went up from a parent was because this happened to be a team of 12-year-olds that are, according to the coach and according to what I saw, studs. One of the probably highest nationally ranked 12-year-old teams in the country. And the parent, of course, out of concern, the first question is, what age can they start throwing curveballs? And it's a good thing the answer I gave was the answer I gave, because when I asked the team how many were throwing curveballs, they all raised their hand. So here's what the science says about the age, about curveballs. So for all you parents that are wondering, and even your coaches. So in terms of science, so when you're looking at anything and its effect on the body, you want to know, what does the science say about the forces? But then that doesn't answer the question only. You want to look at some of the other things that can cause problems. So in terms of science and in terms of the forces on the elbow, the forces, this came out years ago. ASMI did the research. The curveball does not produce any more forces than a fastball. So the changeup we know produces the least, but the curveball and the fastball. So in terms of the forces, you're okay in that department. But we also know that when they do sort of longitudinal studies and they look at young kids getting hurt, when they look at their arsenal of pitches, they see curveballs in there. So it wasn't uncommon for a doctor to say, well, we think curveballs are dangerous. And in fact, there are doctors that are very famous that say, no curveball until you shave. Well, me being in the trenches, I take in the science information, and it was great to find out that the forces were the same, because that opens the gate to, okay, then what is the problem with the curveball? And so the problem that can come up with the curveball for young kids is, one, the way it's taught or who's teaching it. If a sport professional is not teaching the curveball, or if the curveball is being practiced like anything to too great of a degree, then it can cause stress. And you can say, well, it's the curveball that causes the stress. No, the curveball itself, we know, isn't injurious to the arm. So it has to be a variable that has to do with, one, the way it was practiced, two, the way it's being taught, three, the way the kid is making his mistakes while he's trying to learn it, which could be because of maybe who's teaching it, using language that's complicated for a kid to understand or too general for a kid to understand. So the deals with the curveball really have, in my opinion, to do more with the how it's taught, the who's teaching it, than the what of it, that what it actually does to the arm. And I think that's a very important thing to know. Now, if your kid comes home and he's throwing a curveball and he says, I can't throw for a strike, I've got to go practice it more, you have to make sure that he understands, okay, this is something you're introducing into your arsenal. You're not going to use it probably facing hitters because it's not good enough yet, but you can work on it, in a way that is correct. And that is something that's probably the most important thing for youth pitchers to understand. And the parents at that age are the ones that are really can really be in charge of monitoring it. And for all you youth coaches, definitely set aside a good training session to have things be understood about the curveball. But I do not think that the curveball is a problem. I think it's the way it's taught, and I think this is probably true for every pitch. And remember, up to recently, science wasn't really involved in baseball, and also there weren't a lot of sport professionals around, and nobody really is speaking about what are the correct ways to throw it. What are the safe ways to throw it? So what I want to do is I want to address the other part of the curveball in terms of the way it should be taught, in terms of what needs to happen, and this is coming from a motion kinesiological perspective. And then for you coaches, you can take these things and then combine that with what you know as pitching coaches, which I absolutely do not know. And you combine that, and then you can deliver a teaching product to your pitchers. And I think for you youth coaches, this would be a wonderful thing for you to do. And also, coaches, get a ball in your hand and practice some of the things that I'm saying, because know that when you feel something, when you're able to feel it, you're able to teach it better. So, so far, Joe, does that make sense to you?
Oh my goodness, that makes a lot of sense to me. I have to tell you, when I was a kid in Little League, and this is going back a long time. This is before the internet and before there were not too many pitching coaches when I was a little kid. Everyone wanted to throw the curveball because, it was the curveball, and it was kind of like not a voodoo thing, but you weren't allowed to do it. So it made it all the more reason you wanted to throw it. And, we had no idea how to throw the curveball. And the ways I remember trying to throw a curveball, I know were absolutely the wrong way to do it. I probably, if I kept trying to do it, probably would have hurt myself, and I didn't even know how to properly throw a curveball until I was a pitching coach at the college level. And that was when I first learned. Something else I was thinking about while you were talking about, and going back to even back to Jordan Schafer when we were talking about pitching at a young age, there's a theory that I've heard is that if you're going to throw a curveball or even a knuckleball or some other kind of a novelty pitch like that, you really need to learn it at a very young age if you're going to be very good at it, because it's kind of like an instrument. Like you only have a certain window of time when you're younger, and like, before the age of maybe 13 or 14, where you start to learn different skills. And once you get past a certain age, it gets a lot more difficult. So I would have to think that if you can learn to throw a curveball at a young age, at say 10 or 11 years old, just knowing the proper way to throw it, that's probably the best way to learn it is when you're younger. I mean, didn't Barry Zito learn how to throw a curve when he was 8 years old because his dad?
Yeah, actually, he was 6 years old, and I was just going to mention that. As most people know, I worked with Barry in the 2005 and 2006 season, and I remember him. I was there working with him in L.A., and I remember somebody calling and interviewing him, and I happened to hear him say, they asked, how old were you when you started throwing a curveball? He was 6 years old.
Wow.
And now I'm not saying to anybody, oh, you know what, take your 6-year-old out and teach him how to throw one. In fact, I'm going to go back again. Don't teach your son anything if you don't know what what you're teaching.
Right.
I know you dads mean well, and I know the bond between a father and a son in baseball is so cool because you can take them out and, teach them how to hold a bat and everything. But you really want to, when it comes to the pitching part, throwing a ball, yes, you can help him because he's going to develop in a natural way with that. But throwing a pitch is very different than playing catch. And when you look at a pitcher and you think you see what they're doing and you go, well, that's what I'm going to teach my son. First, don't ever look at anyone else and see what they're doing and try to teach it. Secondly, what you think you see, you're not seeing. Believe me, I look at pitching all day and I can see tons without a camera, but I never trust it. And what you see with a camera has a big effect on what you see with your naked eye. So parents, please know there's a difference in throwing and pitching. And when it comes to pitching, find a professional that you really trust that has a good reputation, and ask the kid, is this making sense to you? And you should start to see your kid do something better after he's had some sessions. So yes, early age is important. Plus, you get all that time to practice it. And of course, Barry was probably somebody who had the ability to integrate information because he's a tremendously smart guy. So, and of course, when he came on the scene, no one had seen a curveball like his. That was his claim to fame when he was in college. So, and now we know there's tons of curveballs in the major leagues. But yes, so there are many, many stories, but definitely following the idea that everything should be done right. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. I say that pretty much about everything. It's just like there's nothing wrong with a steak for somebody who needs beef, but a steak might be bad for somebody who's just had heart surgery. It's not the thing that has characteristics that are bad. It's the effect on the person that's using it, eating it, doing whatever with it, that it gives it its nature. So be sure that you always know that. So I would like to see the scare of the curveball come off, but I want to scare you into being afraid to teach it if you're not someone that should be teaching it. And teachers are very different than doers. And doers are different than just plain instructors. So you want someone who knows how to teach concepts and teach the right things for a curveball. So, Joe, are we ready for the way that the three things that kinesiologically need to happen for a curveball? You ready
Oh,
for this?
absolutely. Throw
Got
it
your
at us.
pencil going? Okay,
Yeah,
here
let's
we
hear it.
go. Okay, so guys, these are the three things that have to happen to have a good curveball, and these all come from understanding motion, the way motion's created, and the timing of motion. Also, understanding the rules of certain muscles, the way they're constructed around joints. So, while this is going to sound simple, it comes with having a broad base of information from many fields of science, muscle mechanics, movement science, motor science, etc. So, first of all, you have to understand the action at the wrist of the curveball, and the action at the wrist of the curveball is called ulnar flexion. If you turn your hand up in front of you and your forearms facing upward, the bone on the inside of the lower arm is the ulna. I mean, we know this from the ulnar collateral ligament. It's on the inside of the arm. And the ulnar flexion, if you turn your hand sideways in a slicing motion and you move your wrist with the baby finger coming down towards, like, let's say the ground, that's called ulnar flexion. Google it if you need to see it in action. You probably already know what I'm talking about because you know that a curveball is released that way. But that action at the wrist is critical. It's what causes the break. Now, the confusing part for the pitcher when it's not breaking is that there's another action that happens at the wrist, and this is a forearm action, and the hand turns upward. If you put your palm down like the position your hand might be in as you're releasing a fastball, as you turn it sideways, that's called supination. So the wrist is doing two things. If you don't do that ulnar flexion before you do the supination, you're going to have weird things happen. You're getting a combination of actions, but they're not quite timed right. And that's why the precision of a curveball is so gorgeous. I mean, I've been watching the ball lately, and I'm actually, Joe, you'd be proud of me. I'm starting to see the ball break, and I'm starting to see spin, and it's really exciting to watch a curveball. That comes from that exactness of those motions. Now, you need to understand them separately before you can put them together. Now, the pitcher just throws it, and it's never taught with those two actions. And sometimes he gets it right, and sometimes he doesn't. But my pitchers that had trouble with their curveball this year, this is what sent me to the drawing board to figure out a way that I could teach it without being a pitching coach, but from the muscle standpoint. Because they were saying, Angel, can you teach me something about this, like what you taught me with the stride? So when I would teach them, I trust the pitcher. He's going to put this information together. So they put it together, and they're like, oh, this is awesome. So understanding the two actions. So you've got to make sure the wrist does the action that it does before the forearm starts to rotate. Now, pitching coaches, I want to tell you how smart you are. You know, I always love saying you guys are way smarter than you know. Well, I always hear you saying, don't create that pitch too soon. Don't create that pitch too soon. Well, that's what you're actually saying. Don't turn that arm before you're ready to break the wrist. That's really what you're seeing. You didn't know you were saying it, but that's how smart you are. So does that make sense, Joe, so far?
Yeah, so far so good. I'm getting it.
Okay. Now, the next thing that's really critical is, and this is extrapolated from research they did when they looked at the differences between pitches. So I have to connect dots between things. So when you deliver a fastball, your elbow extends and your wrist flexes, and it's flexing, coming out of extension, flexing, and that's how a fastball is delivered. A curveball does not have a fully extended elbow, and the reason why this elbow has to have a slight release in it is because the action I just told you have to do at the wrist. If the elbow's too straight, you're going to be tight around the wrist. So again, this is another factor that when you're teaching a curveball or someone's having trouble, this is a place you want to go. I have never not had a pitcher improve his curveball right there in the bullpen session. Like he looks at me and says, my curveball's not working. And of course, when they say this to me, they're looking for an answer that is not a pitching coach answer. And you guys have one department, so I'm not saying that isn't the way to go. That's your department, but I don't know anything about that. So I have to always address things from a muscular standpoint. So I teach them and give them the feel around the elbow, and then they do it, and who knows what. Placebo or not, it's not a placebo, but they throw good curveballs. So they think I'm their good luck charm for curveballs. So not having the elbow be totally straight is critical to having the wrist be able to move, and that's a rule of muscle mechanics and two joint muscles, etc. And then the third thing, which comes from understanding the way that phases of the motion occur and timing of the motion, and this again is based on research we know about the phases of the motion and what happens and what's supposed to happen where. I know that from watching pitchers who throw a good curveball, they're pretty much out in front of their front leg, more on a curveball and a changeup than on a fastball. I think they should be over their front leg on all pitches, but I know that pitchers who historically don't get over their front leg, they get over it more on a curveball and a changeup. And that's because these guys have figured out that they need a little more time in the front of that motion to have their forearm and wrist change the position, because it's coming through it starts the acceleration path in a fastball position. So now picture a fastball being released. That forearm and that wrist have to turn in a certain way in order to accommodate what I mentioned in the first part of this with the flexion and the supination. And if a pitcher gets caught in the middle of that because he starts to stand up on his pitch, let's say he's tired and his stride becomes shorter. Let's say it's late innings. And let's say he's starting to shorten his stride, which is what we know they do. So let's say he's standing up a little more on his pitches. His arm is going to get caught in the middle, and you'll have a pitcher releasing the ball before he actually fully supinates or fully flexes, because he's standing up and his arm is still trying to shift from the fastball delivery into the curveball. And as you pitching coaches always say, and you are 100% correct, create the curveball at the end of the delivery. You already know this. I heard you guys say this. I wondered what it meant, and then I connected it with what I know about science, and so you know what you're talking about. So when you see, especially in late innings, a good curveball, thrower going down, check and look if he looks like he's more upright, if he's not getting over his front leg. And that's the way a good curveball can go bad, especially when fatigue starts to set in. Just for, I don't care if a pitcher's tired or not, if he knows what he's doing, he's able to correct it and pull it out. So if you've got someone in and you can't pull him out, but his curveball's not working, take a look at this and just say to him, hey, you got to get over your front leg. You're standing up. And that will give him the time to do the magic he has to do with his forearm and wrist. So those are my three must-do movements of a curveball. And I wish everybody luck with it. What do you think?
Wow, that's fantastic. A lot of the things that you've been talking about, two things, it pretty much apply to any pitch, the fastball, the changeup, whatever. I mean, we're supposed to be getting over our front leg and doing all those things correctly anyway. So, proper good mechanics are, necessary to throw a good curveball as well. Number two, the the thing that you were talking about, create the pitch late. The other thing that we kind of use as pitching coaches, we say, think fastball when you're throwing the curveball. Think fastball until right at the end, and then do the curveball motion.
I love that. I love that. Now, you just used a word that is not a word I use, but pitching coaches all know when you use this, be careful of using it. So use the word late. You guys love to use late, early, whatever. I'm always careful because if I say late to somebody, they feel like there was something that they were supposed to do, but they didn't do it on time.
Right.
And so, but I know that's common language. But what coaches want to do, and this is what I do, and I mean, I have science behind what I'm saying, but listen, the science behind what I'm saying has nothing to do. It has to do with the content of what I teach. How good of a teacher you are has to do with the way you are able to, one, say it is what's on your mind to say about how you're going to teach something. Two, look to see if the pitcher understood it. And guess how you're going to know? Something will happen that's a good thing. If that doesn't happen, go in your bag and pull out a different way to say it. My guys know that I'm going to say something. I might have to say something 6, 7 different ways. And then they'll look at me and say, okay, that something you just said made sense. It all makes sense, but it's the thing that clicks with them. So when you use the word late and early, make sure they understand. You don't have to stop using the word, but say, just like you did, Joe, you said, well, create the pitch late, meaning have it be a fastball until the very end of the motion. What that does is it shifts the word late and it makes you think, oh, okay, now I've got it. And so there's nothing wrong with the word, but know when you're using anything that has to do with temporal things like early, late, timing, that you want to always make sure you're understanding it and that the pitcher understands it. That's critical for
Right. Yeah.
teaching methods.
Yeah, and you took the words right out of my mouth with as far as going back into your bag and having a different way to say it. I think it's so important, like you said, for us coaches to fully understand what we're teaching, to try and do it ourselves, to get an even better understanding, and to always have 5 to 10 different ways of saying what you want to happen, because you don't want to be a coach who, I mean, the coaches I had to deal with when I was younger, they were just fathers who were just volunteering, and I don't blame them. They were trying, but you don't want to be a coach who says something like, bend your back, but you really don't understand what you're saying or why you're saying it, or think fastball, but you don't really understand. You need to have a full understanding of what the process is, and in order to kind of like come up with different ways to kind of convey it to the player, to the pitcher.
Right. What comes from the heart of a teacher, which is what I have, is the feeling that if the student didn't learn it, it's because I didn't say it right. Frequently, when we see our performer not doing something we told them to do, we get upset because in some way it's like we're sure we said it right and now they're not following our instructions. You always want to lead with, he's not getting it. Okay, I'm not saying it right. Of
Right.
course, there are some guys out in the field you just go, wow, this guy needs to find a different sport. But truthfully, you want to come from the heart of a teacher when you're trying to teach specific things. And if you do that, you're going to feel a lot less stressed. You're going to give yourself more moments to be creative and just throw something out and then look with a neutral eye. And if the pitcher gets it, awesome. If not, while you're looking and he's not getting it, you'll be surprised at how creative you can be with coming up with another way of saying it. And I think that's the way the relationship works the best, and I think that's the way pitchers can learn. So I will be wishing everybody to have a great curveball season this year.
I think everyone will, and I think we've had enough for this episode. I think it's time for the coaches to let all this sink in, take it out to the field, and teach it to their pitchers. As always, thanks so much for listening. If you want to find out more about Angel and what she does with pitchers and find tons of information and resources for keeping pitchers healthy, go to Angel Borrelli's website. It's gymscience.com, gymscience.com. So many things that you can download to keep your pitchers healthy. You can also follow her on Facebook. Just look for Angel Borrelli Pitching on Facebook and sign up, follow, share. You know the drill. And if you want to learn more about me and what I am doing to keep pitchers healthy, you can go to fixingpitchers.com. You can also connect with me on Twitter at fixingpitchers. Once again, thanks so much for listening. Please pass it along to another coach, another pitcher, another parent. Please go to iTunes and give us a great review. And in the meantime, we wish you safe and effective performance on the pitching mound.